Okay, hi everyone. Both teams on the call. Is proposition on the call? Can I be heard?
Yes, we are both here. One of our speakers is not around, so I will be ironing for him.
Okay. Just write down your speaking orders in the text space.
All right.
Okay, cool. Is Arnold on the call? Is Arnold on the call? I don't know. Am I still audible?
Yeah, Raima, I'm on the call.
Oh, okay, cool. So, welcome to round two. The motion for this round is this House opposes the use of school uniform within public schools. All rules apply to World Schools debate format. Without further ado, I'll now like to invite the Prime Minister to start with the debate. You are advised to keep a background timer. Anything additional after the 15 minutes that are given shall not be recorded. Here. Before you begin, let me just confirm if James has started recording the room.
Raima, I've already started the stream.
Okay, cool. Okay, could I have the Prime Minister? Yeah, here.
Can I confirm that I'm audible?
Yes, dear, you're loud and clear.
Okay, may I have a minute to set my timer? Okay. My speech begins in three, two, one. Panel, I want to start off my debate by characterizing a few things within the resolution. The first thing that I feel like I need to clarify is something like public schools and how they look like in of themselves. Public schools are educational institutions in that they teach core subjects, but in addition to that, they offer social upbringing and personal growth towards these students and learners. You realize that a school in of itself has an obligation, yes, to satisfy its academic obligation towards the students and the trust that the parents have in them. But in addition to that, to also offer personal growth, like teaching these children how to make friends and how to be decent human beings at the end of the day. We think that there should be three metrics to classify what a public school is. One, a public school is something that is accountable to government, in that government has the obligation to perform oversight roles and must meet certain standards, often through things like routine evaluation and testing. In that public schools sit for national exams. For example, in Uganda, USCE, UCE, PLE, they also have routine ministry checks. Because of this, you realize that these schools are partially or fully funded by governments. Government covers expenses like salaries and infrastructure. You also realize that public schools are these schools that teach the local curriculum, and in that sense, they're able to garner a diverse range of students from all socio-economic and economic backgrounds. You realize that this is because the poor or less fortunate are more likely to buy into them because they are affordable and accessible. You realize that they're affordable because the government bears some of that brand, so the costs of things like tuition are less. Two, you realize that they're accessible because in an ideal situation, private schools require large amounts of space, for example, 450 acres, to set up infrastructure that they believe is holistic enough for the students that they have. The middle class are likely to buy into them because they still uphold patriotic values and values that the local community, like, has. Still, you're able to realize that in these schools, people are able to get opportunities to rise as high as the elites because there's a certain sense of social capital that is within these systems. The elite are more likely to buy into it because the elite is usually made of like political leaders. So they are more likely to send their children to these kinds of schools because they appreciate the patriotic values that are within them, and they still want to maintain the facade that they are propagating good education within the country and are even willing to send their children into it. Now, school uniforms. School uniforms in of themselves are usually very bland, and they are good like they it's some they're simple clothes. It's like a short and a shirt, a skirt and a shirt, maybe a blazer, a sweater, something like that. They're usually made of like pastel and neutral colors, and usually are designed to depict simplicity. The keyword being depict. They're designed to look very simple, but made of high quality, expensive fabric because usually the idea is that you're going to wear it for the whole year. So the point of a school uniform is to cultivate something like uniformity and a sense of belonging. What we realize is that belonging can never fully happen unless you're fully being yourself. I will mechanize on this in my second speech. Two, you realize that uniform policies in of themselves are extremely forceful in that you realize that with when you have a school uniform, the idea is that the school will want you to keep it neatly pressed, appropriate. You're not allowed to alter it. The idea is that you have to wear polished shoes and things like that. I'll also show you in the later part of my speech why this is a bad thing. Now, another thing that I want us to understand in today's debate is the role that a school has towards the students or something like that. Yeah. So the role that a school has towards its students is that the impact is supposed to be multifaceted. In addition to academic growth through these core subjects, the idea is that schools are supposed to train future citizens to have skills necessary to navigate the world through personal growth. Skills like self-confidence, self-expression, self-worth, prioritizing, punctuality, adaptability, that kind of thing. Yeah. So they cultivate something like social development and moral growth. And this can only happen if you give people the avenue to be who they really are, especially people who are young and impressionable. Now, you realize that I just want us to also understand at what point in time the school is responsible for children. The school is only responsible for children, particularly during school hours. For example, if it's a day school, or if you're like a student in day, the idea is that if school is from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., the idea is that the school is only responsible for you during that amount of time. If you have no classes over the weekend, what you do over the weekend is none of the school's business. If it's a boarding school, what you do over the holiday is none of their business. They're only obligated to take care of you within school premises. If you decide to like commit as a certain act outside school hours, but you're still in school uniform, the school is not responsible for you and does not have an obligation towards you. Now, preemptively, I just want to make sure that opposition understands the world in which this debate takes place. This debate can only take place in a world where, wearing school uniform is an option. By virtue of the fact that we are opposing the wearing of these school uniforms, it means that it is something that is actually possible. The idea is that they cannot bring up something like universal primary education and the like, because at the end of the day, those kinds of institutions cannot even afford infrastructure or scholastic materials at the end of the day. So something like school uniform is a luxury to them. Two, I think that we need to understand on grounds of security when these people have an obligation towards you. As I mentioned before, the school only has an obligation towards maintaining your security when you are within school hours and conducting yourself as a student of that school. Now, on something like security, I still think that you can't credit school uniforms for providing security, in that I've shown you how public schools look like, and it's highly likely that if you're wearing a public school uniform, you're going to be labeled as an elite, or particularly someone who is from a fortunate background. This just then means that it's highly likely
I
that you're going
speak
to
up.
be threat to kinds of things like kidnap and the like. Now, on to my first argumentation. I just want to use this part of my speech to show you why not wearing a school uniform is particularly beneficial towards the school itself and generally the society within which these people live. You realize that a school uniform, by virtue of the fact that it is extremely forceful in nature, in that everyone is obligated to wear this kind of uniform thing, iron it, wash it and that kind of thing, you realize that at the end of the day, people do not have do not have laxity to express themselves. What does this mean? It just then means that on the side of the school, it's much harder to identify children who are void of character. In an ideal situation, you realize that when you don't give these children school uniforms, people who are void of character are more likely to wear, like mini skirts and the like. But in a situation where you give them school uniforms, it's much more easier for them to promenade in the facade that they are also well behaved. This just then makes it extremely hard for the school to identify which kind of people they are dealing with. At the end of the day, it's extremely important for the school to actually identify these individuals, because in that situation, they're able to make more deliberate efforts towards shaping them personally. The counterfactual we offer you on our side of the world is particularly giving these children the ability to wear casual wear when they are going to school. Casual wear in that they are able to fully express themselves, and in that way, the school is able to make more intentional efforts to help those who are not yet aligned. You realize that in a situation where these children actually have the option to wear casual wear and things like that, the idea is that you are able to make deliberate efforts towards shaping it. The impact is that you're actually able to make for a better society, because you then make more deliberate efforts towards aligning these children and direct efforts towards them. At the end of the day, in a situation where you have school uniforms, the idea is that the effort is going to be generalized, because you cannot exactly tell which kind of people you're dealing with. So at the end of the day, you then have a situation where you have you're giving the same amount of people and the same crowd equal efforts. You're grouping the good kids and the bad kids in one basket. The idea with not giving them a school uniform is that people who are void of character are able to expressly identify themselves that, oh, I am indecent and I like to be indecent. When you don't give me a school uniform, and when I don't have school uniform policies, I have the ability to pierce the whole of my ear and have 6 piercings in while I'm wearing casual wear. This particularly shows people what kind of person you are. And when you show them that what kind of person you are, it affects how they perceive you. When they perceive you in that kind of way, you realize that they then have the ability, you're in my protected time, you realize that they then have the ability to identify you and treat you as such. Now, the importance of them treating you as such, as I have shown you, impacts greatly how the response that authorities are going to have towards you you get. So at the end of the day, it just then makes for better personal growth and helps the schools to hold up their end of the bargain, in particularly helping these children undergo this kind of personal growth, in that they are able to easily be identified and the system can make deliberate efforts towards improving them. I beg to submit.
Okay, thank you for the fine speech. Those speakers a little bit of your time for 9 minutes. I remind you to keep background timers. My timer didn't sound, so I couldn't see you. Your time too. Cool. So without further ado, I'll invite the leader of opposition here.
Okay, Chair, I would request you to notify me when my time is done. Yeah. Okay, I will start in 3, 2, 1. Go. Chair, I think it is very important for us to understand a few points of clarity. But before I go into what my clarity will necessarily look like, this is what you'll expect from my speech. You will expect, one, I will do a bit of recharacterization and framing for today's debate. Then I will engage in a rebuttal, and then I will bring to you our argumentation and show you why we necessarily edge out a side negative in today's debate. But before I go into a few pieces of characterization that we think we do not get from side affirmative, first and foremost, they do not explain to us why necessarily schools exist and why these particular schools exist. We tell you from side negative, it's one, in order to enhance education, which is intuitive. Secondly, in order to bring people from different backgrounds together, that is to say equality. And then third and most importantly, to bring unity and brotherhood within these particular people. We think we highly contest with the idea of what public schools look like from side affirmative. We think they clearly misconstrue this particular idea of what public schools look like. What do we think public schools look like? One, we agree with the fact that they're under full control of government. We do not consider schools that are under partial control of government. Why? Because they're not fully funded and they're not under the full control of government, and they cannot be classified as public because to a certain extent they have a private hand in them. So the idea that Pungs and sub public schools is not there. Another idea of what public schools look like are they are normally attended by people that cannot afford private or semi-private schools. That is to say that they look like UPE and USEE schools, and most times they have unstandard structures. And that is what many public schools look like in particular third world countries. We think this is what public schools look like. But first and foremost, what is it then the difference between a public school and private school? We tell you that one, private schools have extremely high levels of school fees. They are under partial or no control by the government, and uniform is not necessarily a must from their side, from their particular side of the house. Chair, on framing, we think that this debate is to take place in third world countries. Why? Because one, they are the ones with less private and international schools. Secondly, they are the ones where most people go to public schools such as USEE and UPE, because most of the people are poor, are under the poverty line, and in most instances the parents don't know the use of education, so they can just take their children to public schools. Third and most importantly, we think it happens in third world countries because the education systems are normally bad. That is why they have more higher access to public schools than they are to private schools. Chair, another characterization that we think is very important is what do these school uniforms look like? One, we think they give us a very misconstrued level of what school uniforms look like. They look like one, school uniforms are one, necessarily always decent, comfortable, and most times you can stay in them for a particular long period of time. Why? Because in most instances they are created in order to fit the best interest of these particular students. Why this is particularly important is because from their side of the house, most people in their counterfactual world will choose wear that goes to appease a particular friend other than work on things that is more decent and comfortable, which then already repels into how their particular education plays out, because they spend most of their time actually concentrating. At the end of the day, what rebuttal do we get? What on rebuttal? What do I specifically give you from rebuttal? What they tell us from their side of the house is that one, uniform prices are highly costly. Shall we have two basic responses to this? One, in the long run, we think uniform prices are less costly compared to flipping clothes, which is more costly. Why we think flipping clothes is more likely on their side is because people will normally get the pressure of peer pressure, of wearing the same clothes day in, day out. So they will be incentivized to flip clothes day in, day out, day in, day out. Secondly, it lasts a long period of time, as they had said. That means in the long instant, when you have a uniform that lasts almost a year or two, it is better or it is less costly than flipping clothes every month or every 2 months. That means on comparative, we think their side of the house then becomes more costly than our side of the house. They give us an argument that it is beneficial to the school itself. Chair, we don't think this argument can run because first and foremost, they say that they want to identify, it is easy to identify children that are void of character. We think that is symmetrical because at the end of the day, we can also identify children that are void of character by the ones that breach the way they wear the uniform. If you see that in a particular student, you will understand they're void of character. But it is more in their side. Why it is worse in their side is because at the end of the day, their side of the house can spread over this particular vice of wearing balance, or particularly wearing mini to all other students, or wearing short skirts to other students, which in and of itself is something that is detrimental in today's debate. So, Chair, what do we basically give you as argumentation from our side of the house? Firstly, on principle, on inclusivity, what does this principle look like? One, it looks like engaging a higher number of people within the education system, regardless of the background. Why this is particularly true is because for two mechanistic reasons. One, we cater for students that are financially strained. That is to say that at the end of the day, we get to cater for students that are financially strained compared to their side, where children flip clothes day in, day out. And for any child that cannot flip clothes, he will get that sort of stigma because he is wearing the same clothes day in, day out. But second and foremost, we promote indifference. That is to say, regardless of whether you're rich or poor and you're seated in a public school, you are all going to wear a uniform. That means at the end of the day, it creates a more conducive environment and less stigmatizing for these particular students to wear or for these particular students to learn. Why this is then important in the debate or the justification of this principle is twofold. One, people in public schools are normally financially strained. That means at the end of the day, we get to remove the idea of stigma that would happen to their particular children. Secondly, the level of stigmatization goes down. That means at the end of the day, we have lower levels of stigmatization, which then repercutes to the child. That means the child is more likely to perform better as compared to their world. Why these impacts? Then we have impacts on our side. These impacts, understand, Chair, are highly exclusive. One, reduced stigma compared to their side, where if you wear the same cloth for 3 months, you are likely to be stigmatized for not having clothes. Our world does not have that stigma. Secondly, we have higher levels of inclusivity. And thirdly, we promote indifference compared to their side, where a difference is being brought to table. That is to say, people that are decent are different from the people that are indecent. Secondly, on the idea of buying. Second argument on buying, how it looks like is that we get to sell the idea to the parents. Why? Because this works as an incentive to most of the parents that are in third world countries that are normally conservative and care about decency. What this is particularly true is because, one, the nature of parents in third world countries, that is to say that they care a lot about decency. That means at the end of the day, when we have something that is made for them, they are likely to buy into these particular schools. Understand, parents in third world countries necessarily don't care about education because they themselves attained a low level of education. But secondly, parents want to enhance equality. That is to say that they want their child not to be stigmatized at the end of the day, regardless of the background, or given the fact that he does not flip clothes as consistent as a rich kid particularly flips clothes. Why this is important is because it incentivizes parents to take their particular students to school because they buy into what the idea of equality is that the idea of equality that is being preached in those particular schools. And then second and foremost, you get to get less backlash from society. That is to say, schools that have high levels of indecency will get backlash from conservative societies that are mainly in third world nations. The impact of this particular argumentation is threefold. One, we get equality that is highly exclusive from our side and does not occur on their side because children are ever flipping their clothes. Second and foremost, there is a higher incentive for parents to take children to school, which is not in their side because parents will see their children or will see particular children wearing indecent wares or particularly wearing flashy wares that they cannot afford. And then thirdly, we conform to the societal norms such as decency. At a point that we conform to those particular norms, then the society is more likely to buy into education compared to their side, where they are less likely to buy into education because of one, there are likely to be high levels of flipping of clothes, of flashy clothes. That means the rich children are the ones that get to always flip those clothes or those particular clothes. Secondly, you get to have high levels of decency that are not on their side. That means that parents and the society are more likely to buy into our particular idea of education. With this, Chair, I'd like to rest my case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that fine speech. You guys are reminded to check the chat first. I'm testing the time that you guys are remaining with. Please beyond 8 minutes 50 seconds recording. Ensure to keep time. Anyway, I would now like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for the proposition. Here.
Can I confirm that I'm audible?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay. My speech begins in 3, 2, 1. Panel. I know it's quite shallow, but I think that I first want to provide some clarity on the key terms in this resolution. Team opposition, the very first thing that they do in their first speech is particularly question the characterization that we have given you in this debate, in that they oppose the definition of public schools as things that are partially or fully funded by the government. Panel. A public school in of itself is accountable to the government. Why? It is only accountable to the government if they are teaching a curriculum that is from the government. The issue cannot solely rely on funding simply because it's being fully funded by the government. In any case, as long as the government is providing an oversight role, and as long as the school has the need to report its activities to government, that deserves to be a public school, because in that situation, the government then has control over what they are doing within that school. Two, we agree and we think that we should be charitable towards their definitions of what a private school is in today's debate, but that is extremely out of context because we realize that we have already come to a consensus within the resolution in of itself that we are debating public schools. Two, we don't think that the frame of this debate deserves to take place in third world countries. Why? Because I gave you a particular characterization on what these school uniforms look like and what these public schools look like. And in the vast majority of circumstances, you realize that even countries that are not third world, for example, Kenya that boasts of being middle income, you realize that still their public schools still have the initiative to wear school uniforms. So this is something that exists nonetheless, and we don't think that these kinds of societies should be framed out simply because they want to squint the debate to poor people. Panel. I want to give some responses to what we are getting from them. They create some sort of tension within the first speech by questioning what we think school uniforms are. They particularly depict school uniforms as something that is comfortable and decent. That is exactly what we agree to. But what we don't think is a good thing is the claimed benefits that they get from this kind of thing. We tell you in our first speech that the obligation that schools have towards students is particularly to help them to grow personally. This happen unless they express themselves fully. We tell you that in a situation where you give them these uniforms, it is simply a facade. In that these school uniforms cannot be sustained all the way throughout at the end of the day. The issue is equality. Now, here is what we tell you. Even if they base their entire case on something like equality and inclusivity, we tell you that this is something that can easily be breached. Why? Because you realize that schools still have occasions like prom where these people will not be dressed in these kinds of clothes. At the end of the day, people will find other channels to, flaunt lavish lifestyles. Even if you keep them in a school uniform, it's highly likely that he will accessorize it with an expensive watch. Yes, this may not be as pronounced as a full attire, but the day you give him the opportunity to wear a suit or to wear a dress for something like prom, it's highly likely that in that case, he's more likely to gallivant in something that is more expensive to particularly show you his stand in society. Two, they claim that we are telling you that uniforms are
POI speaker.
I'll take you later. Now, even if they are to claim that the counterfactual is expensive, we are telling you that the benefit you get on our side of the house is giving people the opportunity to express themselves. This is something that we are very willing to trade off on grounds that you give people the ability to show you who they truly are. In a situation where they do not show you who they truly are, in a situation where you trap all these individuals in the same school uniform, it's highly unlikely that people are going to have freedom to express themselves. This just ties back to the whole thing of belonging that they bring up. We tell you that there is no way that you can fully belong unless you're being the person that you truly are. At the end of the day, when you put someone in a school uniform, you realize that they are more likely to lie about who they are and where they come from. This just makes for extremely ineffective inclusivity and generally dies down on the diversity within society. You realize that this happens because these people feel the need to particularly portray themselves as their fellows. You realize that when you put people in a school uniform, they then have the choice to be whoever they want as they please. They can lie about who they are. But in a situation where you put people in casual wear, I wear what I can afford. I live within my means. And that is the most likely outcome, because at the end of the day, as a student, you're going to be relying on your parents. So it's highly unlikely that they're going to provide you with lots of money to buy lavish clothes and the like. What is more likely is that they're going to buy for you clothes that they can afford in the quantity that they can afford. So yes, you're going to inherently be able to repeat these clothes. This just then depicts who exactly you are, and it just then makes for a more effective mode of like self-expression. Another thing that we get from them is that you are still able to identify children who are void of character on their side of the house. Now, this is what we tell you. We tell you that at the end of the day, uniform policies are in place. In a situation where you have a school uniform, as it exists on their side of the house, you realize that still the likelihood of people abusing that uniform policy is extremely low compared to a situation where you give them that kind of independence. You realize that when you give them independence, it's highly likely that they're going to take advantage of it and express themselves at the end of the day. On grounds of something like propagating their vices, we think that vices are more propagated in a situation where they are hidden. You realize that when you put people in school uniforms, you hide who they really are, and that is something that they do not engage on. You realize that when you hide these people who are void of character, it's much easier to propagate the vice because there is nowhere that they can be identified. But in a situation where you give them the independence to be who they are, it's highly likely that you're going to be able to cite these people up front. The comparative on their side of the house is that this thing is hidden and the syndicate can continue behind the eyes of the administration. Now, to continue with the extension of my case, we tell you that this is also beneficial to the students. Why? Because you realize that in a situation where you give these people the ability to express themselves, this is something that should then be upheld, because one, the school is holding up on its end of the bargain of cultivating personal growth within these students. You give them the ability to be who they truly are by giving them the channel to actually express themselves. In a situation where you give these students something like casual wear, you realize that you give them like a channel for personal expression. You allow them to express their individuality and personal identity. You realize that clothing is an extremely powerful form of individuality and self-expression. Students are then able to wear what makes them feel comfortable and confident. Enforcing a uniform policy suppresses this fundamental aspect of personal development and autonomy. This then becomes something that is extremely bad, because you realize that then even though these students are integrating, it is not on grounds that they can see who the other is at their best and at their worst. Two, you realize that it is extremely important for them to actually have this issue, because in that case, you're able to address social injustices like bullying. You realize that you're able to actually portray this as a bad thing. When you realize that you, like in school uniform, it's highly unlikely for this kind of thing to happen in the, like, it's going to happen, but on grounds of like different things. You realize that when you have like uniforms, you do very little to address the root causes of bullying. For example, socioeconomic disparities. But when you don't have a school uniform, you're able to address this kind of thing up front and deal with it and portray it and give out punishments like up front. I beg to submit.
Okay, thank you for that very fine speech. I'll now like to invite the deputy leader of opposition. Here.
Chair, am I audible?
Yes, you are loud and clear.
All right, let me set my time, organize my notes, and I can begin my speech. Okay. Sure. My time begins in 3, 2, 1. Chair, my speech is going to be basically divided into 3 things. Firstly, I'm going to rebuild on what Peter tells you. 2, give you engagement on why I think then that the case that comes from the team arguing in prop. And then 3, do my extension. Before I go into like
Hi, Shanice. You're no longer speaking. I don't know if it's your network, but I can't hear you. Is it only me who can't hear? Can I be heard?
Yeah, we can't hear Shanice.
Okay.
Chair, am I audible now? My device kind of disconnected immediately I started.
I can now hear you. You can restart your speech.
Yeah, because it disconnected immediately I started. Oh shit. All right. My time begins in 3, 2, 1. Chair. 3 things I'm going to do in my speech. Firstly, engagement. Secondly, rebuilding on what Peter says. And thirdly, extension. Firstly, on engagement. We think that the case that comes from team proposition is actually flawed and does not have like anything like utility or even like advantage or even a reason as to why we should like credit them at their bare minimum, right? Firstly, they come and tell us that you see the reason as to why they don't want to buy into uniform is because things like belittling kids that have like less financial capability to afford like expensive clothes that are like necessarily on standard and stuff like that still exist because kids are going to like still like add accessories like watches. They are still going to like actually have things like prom where they showcase this kind of wealth and things of the sort. Why we think that chat is necessarily not something they should even be fronting is firstly because they agree that this kind of like showcasing money in terms of like dressing up for uniform is bad, right? They agree that there is belittling of kids that do not have like the ability to actually afford these kinds of like accessories or this kind of like money, right? So and then we think that unless they understand that it is worse on their side of the house where you're subjecting these kids to that kind of mental torture each and every day that they come to class they have to be belittled because apparently the lottery of birth placed them in like families where they do not have like the money. We think it is bad, right? Now why when this kind of thing exists on their side of the house, we think it necessarily affects the mental health of the kids and then it affects like their performance in class, which goes against why schools exist in the first place and which goes against their performance and how they manifest themselves in society. Two, the biggest importance they think they have on their side of the house is how people have a sense of belonging, how people be themselves, and the chat on how you're going to necessarily expose people for who they are. First response is that even when there is like school uniform in status quo, even when school uniform is like being upheld, we still have kids that are going to like not iron it. We still have kids that are not going to wash it. We still have kids that are going to chop the uniform and make it like short and something like that. So we think that in that regard, their character is still like being portrayed, though they don't give us a reason as to why they think that is important. We think that when their character is portrayed, it then goes back to why school exists in the first place, right? It means that in this regard, because there is a uniform that you must follow, school can necessarily come and like clash you, it can necessarily punish you and bring you back on code, right? Because your character is going to be influenced on something that school has like access to, or it has like a standard it has set. It means that you're still going to be clashed and corrected and actually put back on the right path, which is something that then schools necessarily stand for to correct in this kind of society. But then secondly, we think that the kind of belonging that then exists on their side of the house is like marginalizing of people, right? We think that you, because you manifest yourself as a person who comes from like a well-broke family, right? As someone who cannot afford to change their clothes every month, every term, and every semester, we think that then on their side of the house, the belonging that actually comes is going to bring about things like divisions of people according to class, right? Marginalization and like segregation of people because of like the money they have like back home, right? So unless they prove to us why this kind of belonging is important, we think they cannot take on this debate. Thirdly, they clash on framing. We think this is actually something very feeble they actually like front, because even if we take them at their best, we think that the kind of like characterization of like public institutions, they are like the institutions that are governed by government, right? And as they tell you themselves is that they are most likely less expensive or like than these other private institutions, right? So we think that firstly our firm still stands like even when it is a developing country or a not developing country or even that side, even when you take them at their best, our case still stands because of like the kind of inclusivity it has, that whoever goes to a public school in whatever kind of country they have is that they have like less money compared to like the rest of the population. But then secondly, we think that it then exists more in a third world country from to defend our frame, because these are like the countries that necessarily uphold things like uniform, right? These are the countries that have things like conservative societies where people want to take their kids to school that actually necessarily have things like uniform that then lies in line with their kind of of whatever, of values and norms, right? When they from things like, you're going to have bullying and stuff like that, we think it exists more on their side of the house when you then divide people according to the lines of the money that they have. Now, a little bit on rebuilding. Peter tells you two things, right? He tells you inclusivity and buy-in, right? So one thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to show you why this kind of inclusivity and a world with no stigma is going to most likely happen, right? We tell you that because of like the financial status of these kinds of things, right? The stigma is most likely going to happen on their side of the house because there are some things that students can't change, right? Because when you come from a poor family, you're most likely still not going to be able to afford to change your clothes like every single month or every single time, right? So the stigma then lies on our side of the house, which is something we mitigate on our side of the house, because you see that we do not like necessarily have that kind of division being provided because of like the uniform that is actually made, right? Now, why this is then important, the impact is that you're going to like have kids in like a better mental state to study, right? You're going to have them increase their likelihood of success, their likelihood of getting jobs, reducing poverty, and actually like uplifting themselves in society and giving them kind of like an identity, right? Secondly, when he tells you on buying, this probably comes from the whole idea on how uniforms are made and what is considered, right? Understand that before a uniform is made, people sit down and look at things like comfortability, look at things like decency, things like longevity and stuff like that, right? So we think that firstly, because of the kinds of parents of these children in this kind of status quo, is that they are the kind of parents who probably didn't go like to school, right? So they do not understand the value of education in the vast majority of instances. But then when you bring in a school uniform, when you tell them that your kids are going to go to school and put on things that still lie with your religion, that still lie with what you believe in, and still are decent and affordable and accessible, we think that then you're going to like have these parents buy in more into like taking their kids to school, which is something that is then like important in society, because kids are going to like have like this kind of access to education, have like poverty alleviation and stuff of that sort. And because these are two things that are not responded to from first prop and second prop, we think that then they do not have to deserve to take this home debate. Now, onto my extension. My extension is going to be quite simple. Firstly, show you why uniform is important and why important in public schools. Firstly, on why uniform is important. It comes basically from the kind of like unity and inclusivity that is going to be brought about, right? The sense of belonging where people do not have to be like divided according to financial lines, right? And then thirdly, because of the nature of these public schools and because they need like money, it is like a project to make money and like increase on their possibility of like making a budget, right? And why in public schools we think that these other schools that necessarily cater for like poor families, because they like accessible and affordable, because they are like being held up by government, right? Three, they kind of like educate badly off communities, and they like necessarily provide education and like a way to actually uplift these people out of poverty. Now, why we think it is important to have that necessarily uniform attached to these public schools is because it puts people in a mental state to actually study, right? It gives people a sense of belonging where they can actually study and like have that kind of affiliation to school and a reason to want to go to school, because no one is going to bully them because of like them being able to repeat clothes and stuff like that, right? Firstly, the impact is that you're going to have more people being educated, you're going to have more poverty being alleviated, you're going to have illiteracy being reduced because more people actually go to school and without a fear of being judged and stuff like that. Secondly, because it is a uniform, you're creating a society where people have like they have a virtue of humility and rule following, right? Which we think is something that then inherently collides with what the school is supposed to achieve at the end of the day. So we think that because of my speech, the team that is arguing in proposition needs to probably make a new case in third speech because the one they had does not exist anymore. I beg to rest.
Okay, thank you, Speaker, for the fine speech, and I'd like to invite government speeches for government. Here.
All right. Just a moment. Okay. Yeah. Right. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, particularly what you get from side book, is the whole notion that the problem they are solving is the only existent problem, but yet everything that links up to their case in and of itself is also a problem. Even though they say that at the end of the day, they're going to have somewhat sense of belonging in their side. One thing they fail to understand is that where they have characterized this particular case, one, at the end of the day, you find that there are very many things that are existent, or very many problems that actually bring about the collapse of the sense of belonging. That is to say that even though they say it's not going to be stigmatization, there are still very many other things that actually impact and bring about this sort of stigmatization. That is to say that at the end of the day, on our side, where we are giving you something that will actually front out this sort of reveal, like will sort of reveal the stigmatization that's existed at the end of the day, it's better off rather than on their end where they're telling us that you're going to cover it all up, and at the end of the day, it's not going to like be there, it's not going to be existed. We're just going to wash it off. I mean, it still won't change the fact that this person is poor and this person is rich. That is the whole notion that is existing. But once it's something that is shown and the school identifies that there is stigma that is existent in this world at the end of the day, we find that it's better off. Hence, on their side, even though they claim belonging, the sense of belonging that is existent is very short term, because at the end of the day, you're going to find things occurring, such as like these kids actually like stigmatizing each other on other stances, besides the stance of uniform, besides the stance on how they actually look. On our side, we tell you that, hey, you know what? We're actually going to give them the stance to reveal their true natures. And at the end of that day, if stigma comes about, it's actually something that's going to be taken out, like it's something that's going to be worked upon by the school in and of itself, since it has a particular role to play to these students, to play to the pupils and whatsoever. So another thing I need you to understand here is that on their side, they bring about this particular notion that people in public schools are financially strained. But then again, it contradicts with the framing they bring about. Hence, we do not understand the backbone of their case. We do not understand what they're trying to bring about. Even when they frame it all the way down to third world countries, and on our side, where I want to give them a debatable ground, they bring about a contradictory case, and their side is so confusing at this point, even though they say we have no case. But one thing I want you to understand here at the end of the day is, firstly, in relation to the belonging that we already told you, you find that still at the end of the day, even though they are financially strained, the stance that they have given us, mainly taking them at their own stance, where they're telling us that they are financially strained, that these guys actually are in third world countries, and you already know the characteristics of how third world countries look like. You know the characteristics of how public schools actually take up a whole notion of third world countries and whatsoever. We believe that this is something that is actually should be considered at the end of the day. Because one thing you should notice, Pano, is that one, like honestly, if they're saying that's the case, means that our side actually brings in a better vibe. Because now at this point, people are more equal. People buy into what they actually say. People buy into particular stances, and it is something that can be put into, and it is something that can be intuitively considered. Pano, we believe that we should also focus on the particular notion of, sorry, my bad. We believe that we should also consider the particular notion of like backlash and whatsoever. Even though the side says that, hey, you know what, there's going to be what sort of backlash and whatsoever, we believe that this is something that can easily be brought out of. This is the stance. Like particularly even though they bring any sort of backlash from whatsoever party, this is something that's definitely going to die out. Because if there's a particular stance that is in society, there's a particular stance that is being bought into, we believe that is something that will be accepted at the end of the day, and backlash is just a short-term impact that we should not consider as per this debate. Okay, panel. I think the main question, or the main thing after all that rebuttal and clarity, we should be asking ourselves as per this debate is one. At the end of that day, what is better, a world with or without uniforms? So we believe that at the end of the day, aside prop, why we clearly tell you that, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, there is going to be that sort of belonging. There is going to be that sense of belonging that is existent. And if the characterization of side does not actually support this and does not show us any long-term impact at the end of the day, it is something that does not need to be put in at the end of the day. It is some particular stance that is not taken up and it is not actually like, it does not benefit the world at the end of the day. So we believe that with that particular stance, it is something that can actually be looked into by our side, because the sense of belonging may not be existent, maybe if I have to say for a very short term, but at the end of that day, you actually be put into when the school identifies what is actually going on in the school, when the school identifies that, hey, you know what? At the end of that day, we're actually dealing with something that's instrumental to the roles that we're supposed to play. That is mentioning the whole stance of values, mentioning everything that's existent, as per my first and second speaker told you at this point. Second, another thing I believe that we take as per the stance of like not accepting uniform at the end of the day is that, hey, you know what? You're actually going to depict how this person is existing at the end of the day. You're not going to cover up what they actually do on a daily. You're not going to cover up stances that they actually have, other stances that they actually like have maybe in different places and whatsoever. And this is something that can impact them. Because you notice that if they actually show what they actually are, if they show their true colors and whatsoever, this is something that is better off since schools will decide to engage and decide to change how these guys actually act. That is to say that if they find that you dress indecently, it is something that they can work upon. I mean, they will not, even though they aside wrote up a whole thing, which was not even well mechanized, that you know what, they will come about and have this sort of impression stance that they want to impress the friends that they actually have. We believe that this is also something that will die out because you know what, at the end of the day, the school has a role to you in your existence in the school. Maybe if you're there, if you're a boarder or a desk scholar or whatsoever, this is something that the school is going to actually work on. Because one, it has to keep your values and its values according to the path that it actually follows on the characterization where we told you that, hey, you know what, we are following local stances or following cultural stances that should actually be like taken up by this particular school, that should actually be followed up in whatsoever instance. And that is something that we believe it is like something that could actually stand. So at the end of the day, if you're actually following cultural values and whatsoever, and something that is existent in the local area, that is something that you can take up and decide to be like, hey, you know what? This is not actually dressing up very well. This is dressing up indecently. And so, over this particular student can actually work upon it and actually follow that incentive. But on their side, while they're covering up students with this particular school uniform, while they're actually telling students that, hey, you know what? At the end of that day, you actually have to dress like this, but you're not actually incentivizing them to reveal who they actually are, so that you can actually work on that part of them rather than putting up that whole notion, rather than painting them and making them look how you actually want them to look, rather than working on their particular stance. I believe that is something that's better, and still that is still impactful on the value that is on the values impacted into this particular child, so that when he goes back, when he or she goes back to where he actually comes from, this is something that can actually be beneficial, and values are now transferred from the school particularly to the child in and of itself. And at the end of the day, you find that there's a better societal stance as for the values that are actually inducted, and the school can actually fulfill its role when, like, one, they feel a sense of belonging, and two, at the end of the day, they actually fulfill their roles by inducting values into this particular student. With that, proud to propose.
Okay, may I confirm I'm audible? Chair, may I confirm I'm audible?
Yes, you're loud and clear. It's just that my gadget had refused to unmute. You're loud and clear. You may begin your speech.
Please do the timing, and I think when my time is done, I won't be looking at the text field, so you can just unmute and tell me my time is done. I'll take your eyes, I think, around 5 minutes. But yeah, I'll start my speech in 3. Wait a moment. Okay. Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. This house opposes the use of school uniforms in public schools. I think I'm going to first show what burdens of both teams were, starting from Prop. I think Prop's biggest burden was to show us as to why the world in which they oppose is something that is very detrimental. 2, to show us as to why their counterfactual or the world that they're supporting is something that is better off rather than our world. 3, to show us what problem and solution they get from their side of the house. On the flip of the end, our burden was to prove as to why we don't oppose this narrative. 2, why our world is then something that is better off or what status quo then has it. Engaging in Prop's entire case.
understand the problem within the resolution is that we want to have like a better education system within public schools and within the whole spectrum within itself. Solution then narrows down where do you get the largest buy-in and where will people like get the best solution to that problem that you have. What do we get from first proposition speaker? First proposition speaker does a good job but fails to show us like in what framing does this world exist, and that is why Peter does a good job to show you that this exists within third world countries because of the nature of the education sector that exists within this type of countries. This simply means because of the state principle that then Shanice keeps on telling you that because of the nature of the education, then these people are mandated to follow the rules and principles that then exist within these schools. Engaging in their case still, they go ahead and show you that these schools within themselves teach the local curriculum. We buy into their idea, but then the issue is they fail to show us why then having school uniform in that type of world when they're teaching local curriculum is something that is very detrimental. Two, they tell us that uniforms have forceful implementation. This simply means that you're not going to get buy-in from people. Two responses you get. A, we think that at a point whereby certain rules and policies are being put, everyone buys into it because there are consequences. For instance, if you do not wear the right uniform, you're going to get punishment like sweeping school or whatsoever. So there is already buy-in that already happens. But even if it's forceful implementation and we take it at their best case, we think that trade-off there is something that is very good. Why is that in itself? Their trade-off is that they want to allow people to express themselves, but then that is already harmful within status quo because of the nature of framing that then Peter tells you this country, like these states, are conservative in nature. That simply means they do not accept immorality and improper dressing. That simply means that people are going to like express themselves in a ways that do not portray who they are. This simply means someone is going to try to fit in a society even when they come from a poor income family, but because they want to fit in that type of society in a public school, they're going to try to do things and get that type of dressing. Simply meaning bullying exists in their world at the end of it all because someone doesn't want to really wear the same type of clothes every time and every now. That simply means impact it has on that child on three layers. A, the child is going to get bullied. Things like traumatization are going to come because of the levels of depression and anxiety this individual is going to get. We'll show you why that is then very detrimental to the aspect of school. That simply means they're not going to perform well in school. What happens when you do not perform well in school? We're going to see things like school dropouts because of your bad performance that came from the bullying. Once there is school dropouts, you're going to become a public nuisance that doesn't even benefit the state at the long run, meaning that education levels are going to decrease just because of a small minor issue that you could have handled at the best, right? So we think that is already out. Engaging on their second speaker. Their second speaker tells you that things like prom and whatsoever exist, but we think because of the policy that already exists, even during proms, people actually dress something that is decently, even if they go like extraordinary. We think that is a one-day thing, and we like buying into that whole idea. So we think that is already out of frame. Two, they tell us that because of the security aspect that you're not going to get kidnapped and whatsoever. We think that is something that you cannot even buy in one. It stops on just the claim. They don't show us the impact because we have seen people that are being kidnapped even when you don't have, even when you have uniform and when you don't have uniform. So I think that is out of context of this debate. Now engaging on their third speaker. Their third speaker brings about the whole aspect of backlash. But we think backlash is worse in their world because of the conservative nature and parents really do not want their kids going to school dressed improperly. This simply means that you're not going to get buy-in from people to take their children to school. Once you don't have that, then you're going to have illiteracy that is existing within state. This simply means school uniforms then do you the whole burden of making people being compiled to actually go to school and dressing in a proper way. Two, even when they tell you that they're going to express themselves in the right way, we think there is less likelihood of that to happen because of the nature of characterization that even you get from Peter. Now engaging in our case. One, we tell you the cost. Peter shows you very well as to why changing uniform is something that is very detrimental, putting these families actually in a more burden to actually keep on buying for their students more uniform. That is very harmful at the end of it all. This then draws me to the main point of clash: inclusivity. Who then better achieves inclusivity? Inclusivity that they front for from their side is that you're going to try to fit in a type of society that you don't actually fit in. That simply means your true identity is taken away. Why then is identity very important in today's debate. We think at a point identity defines who you are, where you come from, your background. By the time you're trading off your identity just to fit in because of peer influence, we cannot front for that one, because you lose who you are at the end of it all that they keep fronting. However, inclusivity from our side is that everyone is accepted for who you are because you're wearing uniform. No one really minds about what happens back at home, because mind you, public schools are then meant for everyone. They do not have class categories. But even if certain classes exist, because of the nature of uniform, no one gives a damn about that. So we think inclusivity is better achieved from our side. Two, we remove stigma under inclusivity. How then does this come very important? We think that at a point whereby you're accepted for who you are, just because all of you wear the same uniform, even if you're rich, even if you're poor, stigmatization reduces. The impact of that is that people are going to study in a safer environment, and that is very important for the education system. Thirdly, on the decency aspect under inclusivity, we think at a point whereby immorality is high in schools, whereby you don't like, where in schools whereby you allow people to wear anyhow they want, we think that that is very detrimental. Why is that very detrimental? We think that there is not going to be school spirit, meaning that people are going to wear anyhow they want and go to school. Two, we think that people are going to lose focus because someone is going to wear mini clothes and they expect other people to actually pay attention. So the spirit of actually you understanding certain concept or you paying attention because of that dress code becomes something that is very detrimental both to students and both to teachers. So we can't buy into that idea too, because of the morality aspect that exists within these third world countries, and because they are conservative in nature, that cannot happen within itself. Now, best case versus worst case. Their best case, if you buy into their whole idea, is one, because of the peer pressure that you have, people are going to try to be who they are not, meaning you're going to have identity crisis that exists within their world, and we think that is very harmful. Two, you're going to have bullying that then leads to distraction from learning, and people actually suffering from the impacts of bullying, like depression, anxiety, and whatsoever. Three, you're going to have different of people that are divided, meaning that small groups are going to be created according to the rich, the poor, and whatsoever, according to what you dress. This simply means costs of dressing is going to be very expensive, yet you can have uniform that you can wear for 2 years, 1 year. So we think even at their best case, that is something that is very detrimental. Worst case from our side is that even if you put school uniforms and some people like try to abuse it, let's say they, because that's their whole concept that they try to push on our burden, we think that is less likely to happen. Why is that in itself? We think because rules and regulations exist within itself, we think that people are going to be compelled to buy to it. So meaning at the end of it all, that happens. Chair, understand at a point where they're unable to show us the drawing line between the counterfactual and status quo, lose out on that. With that, I bet you rest my case.
Thank you for the fine speech. I now invite the opposition reply to sum up the case for opposition. Here. Sorry, where is opposition reply?
Peter, You're doing reply. I don't know why he's not unmuted. But if he doesn't, oh shit. Okay, if he doesn't do it, I think give me like 1 minute to organize my notes
Okay.
and give the reply speech.
Okay. Let me just wait.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So you're going to get the reply?
Yeah, though I'm not prepared for it, but sure.
Tell your teammates to stop running away from speeches.
Nice. All right. My reply speech begins in 3, 2, 1. Chair, I think one thing we need to understand is the importance of education in any country, whether it is a developing nation, whether it is a medium nation, or even whether it is a developed nation, right? So, in that regard, when first proposition actually gives you the reason as to why schools exist, right? With things that look like it has to like shape society, correct the wrongs of the kids, like make them better individuals, so that by the time they are coming to like society, they have gained enough personal growth, social growth, and have something like that. And then the same team necessarily runs away from that direct burden and then runs things that do not necessarily come back to why schools exist in the first place and how it then helps like foster education in status quo, or even like in society. We think that then team proposition cannot win this debate. Firstly, I think the only thing I'm going to do in my reply speech is show you why, even if we didn't debate, the team that argues in proposition cannot deserve to take home this debate. Firstly, it is like on the whole misconception of what stigma is, and they undermine the influence it has on kids' mental health and how it affects how they debate. Firstly, they come and bring to us a flawed characterization or even like a flawed framing and premise of argument where they tell us things of the sort that, you know, in their world, they have like inclusivity and like they do not have stigma of kids because apparently the kids are going to have like their personal identity and they are going to be themselves and necessarily help them grow in some weird way, right? Why we think this is bad, or why we don't even like need to consider this in the debate, is firstly, they do not show us why it is important for like kids to show their bad manners at school, right? They do not show why it is important that when kids have piercings and when they like put on mini skirts or even like anything on that sort, they are then like better, right? We tell you on our side of the house that because uniform is like made and crafted in a way that is supposed to suit the usability of like the kids, right? Because it is made to be comfortable, to be reliable and decent, because it is made in a way that kids are going to have like that kind of uniformity and unity, it then directly goes back to what schools are going to do, right? We think that in a world where then kids come dressed up in short clothes and like they have piercings all over, you're doing nothing to help them grow into better individuals that are going to like be morally upright for society. You're not doing anything on personal growth because they do not mechanize at any one point and show us why when these kids like showcase their bad manners in public, why they are most likely going to get corrected, right? On our side of the house, when we claim that same argument, we tell you that when these kids necessarily get uniform, they can still like alter them and like fit them or shorten them or whatsoever in that regard, which is like portrays their character, right? We tell you that we have more moral upbringing and more social growth because school then has like a right to actually like correct kids on something that they can claim, right? Because I give you the uniform, because I tell you to wear it in a particular way, when you do not iron it, when you do not wash it, when you showcase your moral, like your moral degraded kind of society, we think that in that regard, school then meets its rightful purpose, where they can then necessarily come and like correct kids. Secondly, because they do not show us why it is important exclusively as to why kids should then come to school dressed in whatsoever. Yet on our side of the house, we give you very many importances, we mechanize very many arguments as to why we think that then uniform should actually be upheld. We think we're in this debate. But then also finally and most importantly, we think that their side of the house then does not have anything like benefits or anything like exclusive impacts or anything like reason as to why we should buy into it. Two, it does not have anything like a reason as to why we think we should credit it or even prefer it to a world that clearly gives you more benefits than harms. I beg to rest.
Thank you. And now we invite the government reply to sum up the debate. Here.
Can I be heard?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay, may I have a minute to set my timer? My speech begins in 3, 2, 1. Panel. When you're judging this debate, it's highly imperative that you remember the benefit that team opposition sells to you throughout this debate. The main benefit and the whole, axis of their case is something like belonging and inclusivity. And they mechanize this kind of benefit, even if we had not spoken throughout this debate, they mechanize this kind of benefit in such a way that it is garnered, particularly by creating a facade where everyone pretends to be equal. Now, we tell you throughout this debate that the whole entire debate happens only on grounds of what is better, transparency or this kind of facade. Now, they tell you that it is extremely important to garner this kind of inclusivity in such a way where people's actual, where they come from and who they are cannot clearly be seen. That is something that they front to you throughout this debate. They get equality on their side of the house. The method that they use is by hiding where these children come from and continuing to, create this facade where they continue to live their lives among others, where they have no opportunity to show where they come from. Panel. On the other hand, we give you the benefit of transparency. We tell you that yes, we are selling to you the same impact, but the way that we are getting it for you is by giving you something like transparency in that these children and these students have the ability to be in school and repeat these clothes, and that is something that we are willing to live with. Why? Because of something like likelihood. At the end of the day, I want to show you why their worst case scenario is more likely to happen than their best case scenario. They are selling to you something like belonging and inclusivity, yet on their side of the house, we still acknowledge the existence of something like these children never fully expressing themselves. Now, it's highly likely that these children are not going to ever express themselves because you take away the channel that they have of being able to dress as they please. This is when this whole thing of hiding and pretending then becomes extremely detrimental. In their reply, they are questioning how we fail to mechanize on how this is a bad thing or how it even happens. Yet we tell you from our very first speech all the way through to our third that in a situation where you allow people to hide, then the structure and institutional systems have no opportunity to pinpoint where the problem is. That is the issue with hiding. And that kind of thing is irreversible because people have no way of self-expression. So at the end of the day, you realize that inclusivity is going to be continued, like it's symmetrical. Inclusivity is going to be propagated either way. The issue, the good thing with our side of the house is that it is something that can be mitigated in that you're able to see where the people who are segregating are and deal with them accordingly. On their side of the house, you have this kind of thing where the structure and institutional systems can't respond to anything because of ignorance. There is no way that they can help these children on their side of the house where this kind of thing is going to exist anyway, simply because the system will never know. Why? Because they continue to wear the same kinds of clothes. In a situation where you take away this uniform, you realize that these children are fully able to, present themselves as they are, and be perceived as they are, and be treated as they are, both the good and the bad. The good is that the system is able to acknowledge the disparities that they face and help them out. The bad is that they are going to be treated badly, but realize that this is a benefit that can easily be mitigated only if the system is able to acknowledge that these people are being bullied. In a situation where you give them uniform, there is no acknowledgement of that kind of thing. Another thing that they think, and I think it's a weaker clash even, for them to bring up something like backlash. We tell you that backlash is inherent to anything good, and at the end of the day, we deserve to win this debate because this backlash is going to be short term. Norms shift as a result of changing policy, and that is something that we have to live with. I beg to submit.
Okay, thank you for the fine speech. Thank you for it was lovely. And I come back with the verdict and the justice.